He calm, focused presence in the room, not the loudest voice, often takes control. It's the individual who speaks infrequently, but moves with purpose, who ultimately leads. In a world constantly filled with chatter, there's immense power in those who understand the value of silence. They aren't shying away from attention. Rather, they're honing their capabilities. They observe, they calculate, and they reserve their efforts until the moment truly matters. This isn't a sign of weakness. It's genuine strength, and such self-control is rare in today's society. It's been conditioned to believe we must constantly speak up, prove our worth, and showcase every project we're working on. However, the reality is, the more you explain, the more you diminish your advantage. The more noise you create, the easier it becomes to miss the broader perspective. The Stoics had reason for practicing composure and reserving their thoughts, acting only when the time was right. It wasn't merely to appear wise, but to prevail where others faltered, and that's what we're exploring today. The strategy of silence. Not silence as avoiding responsibility, but silence as a source of strength and power. The ultimate strategic move in a world obsessed with seeking attention. If this resonates with you, please continue watching, because what you'll gain is more than just motivation. It's a new approach to engaging with the world. And if you appreciate content that gets straight to the point and helps you cultivate authentic inner strength, please do me a simple, free favor. Tap that subscribe button. It helps me understand that this message is reaching those who truly need it. Let's begin. Have you ever noticed that the most impactful presence in a room is seldom the loudest? It's the person who refrains from interrupting, who listens attentively, weighs their words, waits, and then, when they do speak, everyone pays attention. This isn't magic or mystery, it's mastery. Mastery over emotion, mastery over impulse, and mastery over one's energy. In a time when so many are desperate to be heard, the individual who chooses not to speak prematurely becomes irresistibly magnetic. They attract attention, not by actively seeking it but by earning it, because silence communicates control, not only over the environment but over oneself, and this level of control is rare. It conveys to others that this individual doesn't need to dominate the space because they already dominate themselves. Socrates once stated, "The beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms." Yet, you cannot clearly define anything, especially yourself, if your thoughts are constantly being uttered before they are fully formed. A person who restricts their words isn't concealing something. They are thinking, reflecting, and sharpening their insights. Most people mistake noise for value, believing that speaking more will make them appear smarter, stronger, or more significant. But noise rarely builds anything. It merely fills the void where intention could have resided. Power doesn't stem from the quantity of your words. It comes from the strength of what you choose to leave unsaid. When you stop reacting out of ego, stop explaining out of fear, and stop justifying yourself for acceptance, you cease draining your energy. And what unfolds in that silence? You create space, not just around you, but within you. That inner space becomes a forge, a place where your thoughts are refined, your presence grows sharper, and your actions carry more weight. Carl Jung simply stated, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Silence is the gateway to that awakening. It's where you begin to distinguish your authentic self from the performative version that constantly seeks approval, noticed, or validation. We squander so much of our strength through unnecessary speech. Every time you speak merely to fill a silence, to be included, or to feel important, you're expending energy that could have been invested in meaningful action. Even worse, you sometimes reveal your plans before they've fully materialized. You inflate them with attention before they've even had a chance to develop. And then, when the time for action arrives, the motivation has already dissipated. Plato remarked, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something." It's a sharp observation, but it holds truth. When you operate from a place of inner security, you don't feel the need to explain every action or narrate every goal. You allow your results to speak for themselves. You let your steady, focused, undeniable progress construct the narrative for you. There's profound empowerment in moving in silence. You stop chasing applause and start pursuing depth. You learn to sit with your ideas before announcing them. You await your instincts to confirm what your ego might have already rashly declared. And when you finally act, it's not about proving anything. It's simply an extension of who you are. No fanfare, no grand speech, just clean, strong, deliberate action. And here's the beauty of it. When people finally notice, you don't need to say, "I told you so." You don't even need to look back. You've already moved on to the next endeavor. That's the extent of silence's power. When you master it, it provides you with momentum that isn't contingent on anyone else's reaction. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But that kind of self-knowledge doesn't emerge in noise. It emerges in stillness, in reflection, in moments where you don't feel the need to defend or declare anything. Because when you're not busy performing, you begin to listen. And when you begin to listen, you start learning about others, about your surroundings, and most importantly, about yourself. That's when you stop being reactive and become strategic. You stop declaring, "Here's what I'm going to do," and start asking what actually needs to be done. And you do it quietly, fully, without wasting words. When you discuss a goal, your brain provides a dose of satisfaction, as if you've already accomplished it. The applause arrives early. The reward feels real, and because you've already tasted it, the praise, the urge to actually follow through begins to wane. That fire, that edge, it diminishes, not because you're incapable, but because you already felt like you did it. And that's a trap more people fall into than they realize. Good intentions, loud announcements, but very little to show for it later. So, instead of announcing your next move, build IT in silence. Let your efforts speak before your voice ever does. When you do speak, make IT count. Speak only when it adds something genuine, something substantial, something necessary. Otherwise, maintain your focus and your silence. That's not weakness. That's your strategy, your advantage. Consider a master chess player. They don't rush, they don't get emotional, and they don't attempt to show off. They study the board, assess the situation, calculate the patterns, and they wait. Then, with one quiet, precise move, they turn the game around. Not because they moved first, but because they moved correctly. That's what silence grants you. Space to think clearly, space to act wisely. This kind of discipline isn't passive. It's actually the most active mindset you can carry. It requires strength to keep your ideas private, to work without external validation, to build quietly while the world is focused on someone else. Silence isn't inaction. It's deep engagement, but with an energy that doesn't leak out. It's like aiming before firing, instead of shooting randomly and hoping for a hit. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." You can't build anything meaningful if your energy is constantly directed outward toward other people's opinions, toward empty praise, toward the need to be seen. Silence is the inward turn. IT is where you stop reacting and start creating, where you stop proving and start building. When you don't feel the need to broadcast every thought or declare every intention, you regain control. Your focus becomes sharper. Your decisions become more intentional. You move with purpose instead of impulse. And when the results finally appear, they are undeniable. Because they weren't merely discussed, they were earned. Plato believed that the measure of a man is what he does with power, and true power begins with self-control, not just over your actions, but over your words, over what you reveal, over how much of yourself you give away before the work is complete. Every time you speak, you share a piece of your inner world, so why not wait until it's something worth sharing? This isn't about secrecy or paranoia. It's about energy, focus, and direction. The quiet builder will always outlast the noisy dreamer. Because while one is talking, the other is laying bricks. While one is gathering likes, the other is gathering. Leverage silence keeps your goals clear, your vision focused, and your mind free from the clutter that accompanies over-explaining or You protect the seed while it's growing, and when it blossoms, when the thing you've built starts to manifest, IT doesn't need an introduction. People sense its importance. They realize something significant has occurred, and they'll look back and realize you never uttered a word. That's what makes silence powerful. It's the discipline to act without noise, to aim without warning, to build without applause, and to succeed without needing to boast. Because real power never seeks attention. IT simply arrives and transforms everything. The greatest innovators, leaders, athletes, and creators all share a common trait that isn't always immediately apparent. They weren't formed in the spotlight. They weren't shaped by applause, likes, or headlines. They were forged in silence, in the quiet hours behind the scenes. While the world focused on someone else, they were building, practicing, and refining, not waiting for permission, but preparing for their opportunity. And when IT came, they didn't hesitate, they didn't panic, they didn't need to catch up. They had already done the work long before anyone was paying attention. But here's the crucial point most people overlook: the real noise doesn't always originate externally. IT is not just the opinions, distractions, or competition. It's that voice within your own head, the one that seems to never stop, the inner critic that questions every step, the doubter that whispers, "What if you fail?" The overthinker that finds 1,000 reasons to delay, to postpone, to hold back. That's the voice that derailed more potential than any external obstacle ever could. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, IT will direct your life and you will call it fate." And that's the peril of inner noise. IT feels like truth. IT masquerades as logic, as caution, as intelligence, but in reality, it's fear in disguise. It's the part of you that's afraid of what happens if you truly step into your full power. Because that version of youth, a focused, disciplined, unstoppable version doesn't require constant commentary. IT doesn't need approval. IT just acts. Silence isn't merely about holding your tongue in public. It's about learning to stop debating with yourself privately. IT's refusing to be drawn into every mental spiral that begins with "what if?" Because when your mind is overcrowded with that kind of noise, your vision becomes obscured. You miss the cues, you miss the opportunities that were meant for you. The mind becomes so preoccupied trying to keep pace with imagined problems that it fails to see the real solutions that are right there, quiet, subtle, waiting. When you begin to silence that inner chaos, something profound happens. You start hearing what was buried beneath the surface, that intuitive voice, that gut instinct, the part of you that knows what needs to be done. And when you notice patterns, little things others ignore, you seize opportunities that seem invisible to the noisy mind. You see connections between things that appear unrelated on the surface, but deep down, they are. Plato once stated, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself," and that's exactly what silence helps you achieve. It clears the path to it strips away distractions long enough for you to truly hear yourself, not the version shaped by anxiety or pressure, but the one that exists beneath all of that, the version that's calm, focused, and clear. You start to realize that discipline isn't just about external action, it's also about internal alignment, about knowing when to challenge a thought and when to let it pass, about knowing when your mind is assisting you and when it's holding you captive. The strength to sit in silence and not reach for a screen, a distraction, or a quick fix. That's real mental toughness, because that silence is where growth begins. It's where clarity happens. It's where strategy is refined. Socrates believed that an unexamined life is not worth living. But you can't examine anything if you're always talking over yourself. You need space, stillness, a break in the noise so you can truly see. And the truth is, the deeper your silence, the stronger your insight, because clarity isn't loud, wisdom doesn't shout, and the most important realizations in life rarely arrive wrapped in flashing lights. They arrive like whispers, and if your mind is too loud, you'll miss them. Here's a question. When was the last time you truly sat with yourself, in silence? No music, no scrolling, no scrotions. Just you, your thoughts, and the uncomfortable clarity that appears when you stop running. It's not easy. Most people can't sit still, because when the noise subsides, their insecurities surface. But that discomfort, that's your edge. If you can face it without flinching, you've just built a kind of strength that no external noise can touch. It is not about becoming cold or detached. It's about developing the kind of composure that doesn't crumble under pressure. Being unmoved doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings don't control you. That pause between stimulus and response, that's where your power resides. React less, respond better, because reaction is impulsive. Response is intentional, and that's the space where real influence begins, not from force, but from calm control. Leadership in its purest form isn't about volume. It's not about having the last word or speaking the most frequently. It's about presence. It's about the energy you bring into a room before you even utter a word. The silent leader doesn't demand attention. They command it not through noise, but through clarity, through stability, through stillness. People sense it, they lean in, not because you raised your voice, but because when you do speak, it's evident that you've thought before talking. That kind of influence cannot be fabricated. It's built in silence, in restraint, in observing the atmosphere before diving into the fray. Aristotle said, "He who cannot be a good follower cannot be a good leader." And to follow effectively, you must first listen well. The quiet leader listens, not merely to reply, but to comprehend, to notice what others miss, to fill the gaps no one else sees because they were too busy trying to be heard. And that's the essence of utilizing silence as a strategy, not just as a personal discipline, but as a powerful tool in the real world. Consider entering a negotiation. The room is filled with tension, agendas, and egos. Everyone is eager to prove something, but you wait, you listen, you let the silence work for you. People begin to feel it revealing more than they intended. And then, when the time is right, you speak. Not much, just enough, but every word lands with impact. That's precision over volume. That's how you turn the tables without raising your voice. And it doesn't just apply to business or meetings. It applies to your personal goals, your projects, your growth. How much time is wasted chasing everything that appears to be progress, but at DDS, nothing to your path? The scrolling, the comparing, the overcommitment, it's movement, sure, but not momentum. Not all effort is effective. Not all action is aligned. Plato once said, "The excessive increase of anything often causes a reaction in the opposite direction." And he was correct. Too much scattered energy eventually leads to burnout, confusion, and regret. That's why silence is important. It forces you to choose, to prioritize, to subtract instead of trying to be everywhere and do everything. The silent strategist acts with intention. They say no more often, they go deep instead of wide. And that depth, that focused, quiet depth, that's what produces the kind of results that cannot be ignored, even if no one witnessed the work being done. So much of winning in life isn't about speed, it's about direction. And you only discover direction when you pause long enough to ask yourself what actually matters right now. Not what's trending, not what everyone else is chasing, just what's true for you, what advances your mission, what aligns with who you are becoming. Silence clears the fog. It reminds you that you don't have to respond to every stimulus, jump at every opportunity, or explain yourself every time someone doesn't understand. You just keep building, quietly, relentlessly, with your eyes open, and your energy intact. Silence teaches you something that noise never will. The value of subtraction in a world that constantly pushes for more. Silence draws you back toward less, but better. IT sharpens your attention. IT shows you where you're leaking energy, because every time you say yes to something meaningless, something superficial, or something out of alignment, you are by default saying no to something that does matter, something real, something that could have transformed your life if only you had preserved your time, your focus, and your energy. And that's why focus is so rare. Not because people lack the desire for IT, but because they're too distracted to realize what they're sacrificing. In a culture overloaded with options, the individual who can streamline things to what truly counts has the advantage. That advantage doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing what to ignore. But subtraction isn't only important when you're feeling strong. It matters even more when doubt creeps in. When you're in that unclear place, uncertain of your next step. When clarity feels just out of reach. Those are the moments that reveal who has trained themselves to remain still and who frantically searches for a quick fix. Because silence in those moments isn't a void. It's a mirror. It reflects back the version of you that's been buried. Under distraction, IT strips away the filters, night applause. No opinions, just you looking at the truth of who you are and who you're not. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But silence doesn't allow you to run. IT holds you in place until you confront yourself. And that's not weakness. That's the starting point of real strength, because clarity, it doesn't come from more input. It comes from slowing down, from reducing the noise. From finally hearing your own voice without distortion. And here's something most people miss. Even in movement, silence plays a role. Not everything loud is productive. Not every action needs to be broadcasted. You can be in motion and still be rooted in quiet. In fact, the most effective action often arises from stillness. That's where strategy resides. That's where timing is sharpened. That's where your moves become deliberate instead of reactive. Plato said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And one of the greatest forms of power is the ability to pause, to act with precision. Not just to move, but to know why you're moving and toward what. You don't build a life that matters by sprinting after everything that glitters. You build it by knowing what to pursue and having the discipline to stay focused when the world is trying to pull you in 10 different directions. That's the beauty of silence. It slows the world down just enough for you to be honest. And in that honesty, you find alignment. And in that alignment, your actions finally start to matter. They're not just habits. They're not just reactions. They become decisions you stand behind. Movements that reflect who you've chosen to be. Not who you've been pressured into becoming. Because greatness doesn't come from intensity alone. IT's not about how loud or fast or aggressive you are. It comes from clarity, from knowing where you're going and why. And clarity only appears when you stop trying to outrun the noise and start listening beneath it. So, even when you're taking action, even when you're building, pushing, creating, carry silence with you. Not as absence, but as awareness, as depth, as that steady internal compass that reminds you, you don't need to be loud to be powerful. Don't need to be seen to make progress. You just need to be clear. Clear on what matters, clear on who you are, and clear on where you're going. Some people move just to say they're moving. They rush into action, not because it's time, but because stillness feels uncomfortable. They confuse motion with progress, noise with meaning, but there's a different kind of power, the one that comes from strategic patience, waiting, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, sitting still, not because you're uncertain, but because you know the moment hasn't arrived yet. And when IT finally does, you don't flinch, you don't stutter, you strike. That's a different level of discipline. To know how to act is one thing, but to know when and to wait until that moment without folding under pressure, that's real strength. Because when you act from a place of stillness, your movement is clean. There's no hydrogen monoxide hesitation. No need to explain it to anyone. You're not seeking approval. You're not asking for permission. You're just ready. And when it's time to go, you go all in. Nitrogen monoxide hedging. No second guessing. No extra commentary to soften the blow or gain applause. You just move with full force, full clarity, full conviction. That kind of action, rooted in silence, refined in discipline. IT doesn't just make a dent. It leaves a mark. It lands. And more importantly, IT lasts. That's the kind of impact most people miss because they're too busy chasing attention. They want to be seen, heard, celebrated. But here's the truth. Fame is loud and temporary. IT requires constant noise to stay alive. It feeds off attention. And when the spotlight shifts, so does the relevance. But legacy, that's different. Legacy doesn't beg to be seen. It builds while the world is distracted. IT grows in the background during the early mornings and late nights when no one's watching. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." And that awakening, the one that drives real, meaningful work, it rarely happens under bright lights. IT happens in silence, when you're alone with your thoughts, when you're building without praise, when you keep showing up day after day, even when there's no recognition. That's where legacy begins. Aristotle believed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Legacy is built from those habits, from that consistency, from the moments that don't make headlines but form the foundation of something unshakable, something you can be proud of, not because IT got noticed, but because IT meant something. And when you live like that, focused, patient, grounded, you stop worrying about being remembered. You start focusing on being real, being useful, being true. That's the kind of work that survives trends, outlives hype, and speaks long after you're gone, because it was never about being known. It was about making something worth knowing, because the most powerful people aren't remembered for how loudly they spoke. They're remembered for the impact of what they built in silence. Their influence wasn't created through noise. It was carved into the world through consistent, disciplined work that didn't ask for attention, but earned respect. They didn't perform for the crowd. They prepared for the moment. And when IT came, they didn't need to announce themselves. The world noticed anyway, so perhaps it's time to shift your perspective. What would your life look like if you stopped explaining and started executing? If you didn't need to share every plan, every goal, every move, because you were too busy making them happen? What if you spent less time reacting and more time observing? Not observing out of fear or hesitation, but with the steady eye of someone, gathering data, patterns, insight. Because sometimes the best move isn't the loud one. It's the informed one, the move that's made at the right time with the right knowledge and the right intention behind it. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something." And there's something liberating about realizing you don't have to say much. Not because you don't have something to say, but because your focus is on something more valuable, on the work, on the vision, on building something that doesn't require constant explanation to matter. And when you stop trying to prove, you create space to prepare quietly, patiently, powerfully. You start playing the long game, and that long game changes everything. Because it's not driven by emotion or impulse or external noise. It's built from clarity. And that kind of clarity comes from silence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that sharpens. Let your work do the talking. Let your decisions speak for you. Let your consistency become your legacy. You don't need a megaphone when your results carry weight. In fact, the louder you try to be, the less space you leave for others to truly sense your presence when you move with intention. People feel it without needing an explanation. Carl Jung believed that a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. And silence is often where that inner fire is confronted, not in the chaos of performance, but in the quiet of preparation. That's where character is refined. That's where depth is built. And once you've gone through that process, once you've learned to be still in the storm, you become the person who doesn't flinch when the pressure is on. In a world full of noise, be the signal, the one who speaks less but says more, the one who doesn't posture but still commands the room, the one who doesn't need the last word because their actions already conclude the conversation. And always remember, the deepest waters make the least noise. The strongest people don't broadcast their strength. The loudest voice in the room might grab attention, but it rarely leads. It's the quiet one, the still one, the one who waits, who listens, who executes, that ultimately shapes the future. Because silence, when it's disciplined, intentional, and focused, isn't just a personality trait. It's a strategy. One that wins battles without ever needing to raise a voice. One that prepares in the shadows and rises when it matters most. One that builds things that last long after the noise fades. That's the kind of power worth pursuing. The kind that needs to be seen to be real, but the kind that works quietly and transforms everything it touches. In the end, it's not about the volume of your voice. It's about the depth of your impact. Let your silence shape you. Let your actions speak for you. And when the time comes, let your results be undeniable. Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. Don't forget to hit the bell icon button.